where they've got previously developed land on them.
Yes, just really briefly, I think we acknowledge that the objective of Purpose 5 is to encourage recycling of urban previously developed land by restricting outward growth into the Greenbelt. But in recognition of the fact that there might be previously developed land in need of regeneration itself within the Greenbelt that could potentially benefit from regeneration, the scores are differentiated to allow a distinction to be made on that basis, to give nuance to the scoring there. As Mr. Bolton noted, it's a relatively small handful of sites, but it's worth noting the distinction in terms of the role that those pieces of land are playing.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rose.
Thank you, ma'am. I don't want to go over the information that's before you, obviously appended to our Matter 4 hearing statement, but I just wanted to come back on what Mr. Vincent said. Obviously, Mr. Vincent pointed you towards the glossary in terms of previously developed land on page 71, which states land which is or was occupied by a permanent structure, including the curtilage of the developed land and any associated fixed surface infrastructure. Obviously appended to our Matter 4 hearing statement, there's a long amount of information, including a covering report from Gately's, which obviously goes into that information. And in the conclusion, obviously having seen all that information, it states, the area of the colliery and the tip, therefore, falls within the definition of previously developed land in the National Planning Policy Framework, having been subject to extensive operational development in the form of tipping and also the construction of structures to facilitate the tipping and movement of colliery spoil around the site from the colliery. There's evidence of hard standing and also earlier gravel extraction. There is no restoration scheme in place for the tip. Then moves on and says, as far as the local plan is concerned, the site should be treated as previously developed land and is therefore brownfield. It does not have the characteristics of an open greenfield site which has not been previously disturbed or subject to operational development. Therefore, on the balance of evidence, its characterisation is properly as previously developed land. But also we need to turn to chapter 11 as well of the NPPF, which also talks about making effective use of land, and then paragraph 120, which talks about giving substantial weight to the value of using suitable brownfield land within settlements for homes and other identified needs and support appropriate opportunities to remediate despoiled, degraded, derelict, contaminated or unstable land, which this land clearly is. I don't think I want to go any further because obviously the evidence is before we were getting quite site-specific, and I think that we're just talking strategically here. And the strategic point that I was trying to make, obviously within the Greenbelt review, we've been classed as a 4 when I said we actually adjoin the urban area, so we should actually be a 3. But irrespective of that, within 3 and 4 on Purpose 5, and given the Council's chosen spatial approach, which was option 3 as brownfield sites, adjoining the urban area, then clearly there are other sites that can actually be considered just on the face of it here, without obviously reviewing other aspects. So there clearly are other sites, more than the one that the Council have actually chosen. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I don't want to go into any further detail on site specifics. Mr. Bolton, did you have anything further on purposes before we
Yes,
move
on Purpose 5, yes. I hear what the Council say about previously developed land in the Greenbelt, such as Norton Airdrome. And I don't disagree that sites such as that, and indeed sites such as my colleague are promoting, or indeed that I'm promoting in terms of a developed site in the Greenbelt, which is a garden centre, all have reasons why they should be looked at seriously in terms of coming forward for development. But if you're scoring against the purposes of the Greenbelt, you have to score against the purposes of the Greenbelt. That further, if like analysis and assessment of whether the site is suitable or not, comes on top of that. You don't work it into the scoring. None of the sites I've mentioned, they should all score 5. I mean, certainly my site does. The difference I can't see, to be blunt about it. but I'm not arguing that my site should be scored lower. I think there's a very good reason why one of my sites should come forward in this instance. But the score is, does it aid urban regeneration? And you could argue that previously developed sites in the Greenbelt actually suck out investment for those type of sites into other areas. But that's not to say, as I say, I think they should be looked at, and a lot of them should come forward. But we're dealing with the scoring here, so there's two. If you understand, I'm saying there's two different things. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So there's been quite a lengthy debate on the Greenbelt purposes and the assessment against them. I think we'll move on now to the next point on the agenda, which was a detailed point, really. Paragraph 6.9 of the Greenbelt Review refers to 3 large previously developed sites outside of 400 metres of the urban area, which were assessed. I suppose this relates to just the previous discussion we've been having. How come were those the only 3 previously developed sites that you identified? Were there not any others? Can you just explain that paragraph in a bit more detail? Thank you.
Yes, I'll just come back to the starting point, which is that here we're talking about smaller parcels, which are where we'd be potentially looking if we were to be considering release of land from the Greenbelt for development. Just touching back onto paragraph 142 of the framework, it can, where you've concluded that there are exceptional circumstances, you give first consideration to land which has been previously developed or is well served by public transport. So although they're relatively remote from the urban area, it was important to consider the role that those largest previously developed sites do perform in terms of Greenbelt. To clarify, there are now 2 large previously developed sites that are a considerable distance from the edge of the urban area, so not reflecting the sites that we've just been talking about. There's Hepworth's Refractory, or former Hepworth's Refractory, which is in the Loxley Valley. There's been a planning application for development there that was rejected on appeal a couple of years ago. There's another site known as Dyson's at Owler Bar, which is remote from the urban area, which was referred to in the Greenbelt Review work as STW1E, which was assessed. That was Dyson's works at Stopes near Stannington. That has subsequently gained planning permission and has now been developed. Although it's worth saying that that site is somewhat closer to the urban area than the other 2. There are no further previously developed sites of any scale remote from the urban area. The 2 large sites that I've just referenced that haven't been built out were not considered to be reasonable alternatives within the spatial strategy because they're in highly unsustainable locations, and in those locations development would lead to unsustainable patterns of development. There are no further major developed sites of that scale at a distance from the urban area.
Okay, thank you. So of those 3, one's now got planning permission, the other 2 are still treated as previously developed sites.
That's right, yeah. The one with planning permission has been completed.
Been completed. Okay, thank you. So moving on to the next bullet point then. Have all of the sites which were promoted for development been assessed through the Greenbelt Review? Can you just confirm whether there's been any that were missed, and if so, why?
Thank you, yes. Yes, all sites promoted prior to the Regulation 19 stage were included either in the Greenbelt Review itself or in the addendum. The Greenbelt Review included sites promoted through the call for sites during plan preparation, including sites listed in Appendix 5 of that document in a table. Those are ones which are remote from the urban area. The addendum then picks up a small number of additional sites that were promoted at the Regulation 18 stage, and those are listed in Appendix 2 of the addendum. A Regulation 19, after both the Greenbelt Review and the addendum had been published, a number of emission sites were published, and those are listed in the Statement of Consultation, which is document CD 23 in Table 1 there, of which all but one of those sites has previously been appraised through either the Greenbelt Review or the addendum. The one that hasn't, which is land at Myers Grove Lane, with a HELA reference S03625, contains sports pitches and woodland, so it hadn't previously been identified as a parcel for appraisal by ourselves, and it hadn't previously been promoted, so it hadn't been through any of those earlier stages of work. So that's one of those emission sites that hasn't been assessed, but all the rest of them have been.
Sorry, can you just repeat the reference number, the one that hasn't been assessed?
It's a HELA reference number. It's S03625.
Sorry, and what was the reason that you hadn't appraised that one? It was...
Well, because it had never been promoted to us in the past, so it had never been picked up through either Greenbelt Review or the addendum when other promoted sites had been. And it wasn't included as a potential resultant parcel when we originally drew them up, because it's largely covered by sports pitches and woodland.
And the sites that were promoted through the various calls for sites and a Reg 19 stage, and that you assessed, were they assessed on the same basis? Were the boundaries the same in your assessment as the boundaries that had been put forward?
Okay, this is a slightly longer answer, so bear with me. This is described in the Greenbelt Review, but effectively, initially, resultant parcels were drawn up around the edge of the urban area, taking account of excluded areas and using defensible boundaries. So that's set out in paragraphs 6.8 to 6.10 of the Greenbelt Review. The 2014 call for sites then brought forward a number of additional sites that were being promoted that either were exclusively in addition to ones we'd already identified, or which overlapped with parcels we'd already drawn up. And so subsequently, boundaries were amended to take account of that. Further additional sites were then identified through the 2019 call for sites, and they were also absorbed as is. So therefore, as set out in paragraph 6.11 to 12 of the Greenbelt Review, the total number of resultant parcels assessed did increase to ensure that where there's an active promoter of sites, the Greenbelt assessment was available to allow for future full consideration of suitability on those sites. Further promoted sites that were first identified later in the process were included in the addendum, including a number that were remote from the urban area and therefore wouldn't have been initially identified through the process of defining and drawing up parcels. In summary, promoted sites were included within resultant parcels, either A, where a parcel already existed and the promoted land falls within it, or B, where a new parcel was promoted that wasn't originally included or was included in the addendum. So where there is a difference in boundary, if it's smaller, it's because excluded areas were removed from parcels, or if it's larger, that's because it was necessary for the resultant parcel to have a defensible boundary on the ground. As a final note, hopefully I haven't lost anybody, following comments that were received during the Reg 19 consultation, which you can see on page 5 and 6 of the addendum did propose a slight change in the methodology with respect to boundaries where promoted land overlaps with those excluded areas. That's to ensure that the totality of those sites are appraised. So this is reflected in revised scoring where that's appropriate, and that's set out in Appendix 2 of the addendum, which is a table titled Existing Sites, Amended Boundaries. So just to be clear, that picks up some cases where promoted sites had been reduced in size because of excluded areas, such as wildlife sites, for example, on their boundaries. The point was made that where a site has been promoted, that boundary shouldn't have been changed to take those excluded areas out. So there's been a reassessment of those sites, which is presented in that table. I hope that makes sense. Maybe I should have gone more slowly.
Mr. Bolton.
I think the answer you got was no. I think what's happened is where sites have been promoted and they fall within a parcel, then they've just been assessed as being part of that parcel. If I'm wrong, then I've got a couple of examples in my evidence, and the council can point me to where the parcels that have been promoted have actually been assessed on their own. First one is a small site at Chapeltown. Figure 1, I give the ownership plan. Figure 2, I give the area that's promoted for development, which is a much smaller part of the site. And when you look at how that is assessed in terms of the Greenbelt assessment, GBO2, you see, I think it falls within site C4SS0247. There's something odd with the plan in that the boundaries aren't actually properly the boundaries aren't properly overlaid on the map underneath. But you can see there it's simply a much bigger site, and the same is true when you look at my next example, which is the one I've used because it's quite helpful, which is a nursery at Door, where you see the site being promoted is quite small, and the site that's been assessed, which my understanding is DW-3-B, that's a much bigger site. It's 4 or 5 times as big, and includes clearly open fields away from the urban area. Now, according to how I've looked at the council's evidence, those sites haven't been assessed. They've been assessed as being part of those parcels, and those parcels have actually, I would say, different characteristics than the sites being promoted. If I'm wrong, I apologise. It's quite difficult to go through all the evidence base, but I think I have done it correctly, and hopefully it will pull out some points that other people I know have made in terms of even their representations. But just to use those as an example.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't want to go into lots of detail about site specifics, but just in terms of the general points, are the council able to shed any light on why there might be differences?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've made clear previously that and Ms Stevens has also made clear this morning that we have assessed all the parcels, all the sites, but they are part of larger parcels, and that's why at previous sessions you've asked us to go away and look at the site appraisals, and we're going to produce a note to that effect. But all the sites have been considered through, but as part of larger parcels. They just need to be. We've been asked to go away and look at the smaller sites. That I think that's the point Mr. Bolton was making. And that's what we've said we will do.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Rose? It's okay.
Yeah, I think just to concur from what Mr. Bolton was saying, I think it came quite clear last week, I think, in the conversations we had. I can't quite remember which session it was in, whether it was matter 3 or matter 4, but there was an acknowledgement that the council hadn't assessed the smaller sites, and I think that was the extra piece of work, I think, that has been requested by yourselves. Because it is clear that the council haven't assessed the sites as submitted. And they obviously, this is a parcel-led approach. This is the beginning. You look at your parcels, then you subdivide your parcels. I was just looking at one of my sites that we submitted. The parcel actually goes either side of a main road. So it just seems quite interesting. That's parcel EC3E, which doesn't quite correspond with the boundaries of the site that we submitted. Appreciate that's a parcel, but we also need, there are distinct boundaries there. There's a main road through the middle of that parcel. So I just think there's that extra layer that needs to occur to actually look at and consider sites properly. I actually think my site might be EC3F. I can't quite read their plan. But either way, there's still a road through the middle of it as well. So I think the answer you're after is no, they haven't assessed the sites. They've actually still stayed at the big parcel end, but actually within parcels, you can actually subdivide them. And actually what there should be is a thorough assessment of the sites as submitted.
Just to assist, Ma'am, in my appendix to this matter, Appendix 1, I've got the correctly plotted parcels. What's happened, I think, with GBO2 is when they put the overlay of the parcels onto the underlay of the map, it's not actually lined up, which is why you actually, when you look at it in detail, when you find that the boundaries go down the middle of the field where they actually would logically go down the edge of the field. And if you pick the overlay up and just move it about 500 metres, probably it all lines up. So there's a problem with that plan, and it's a printing problem or something like that. It confused me for a while before we worked out what happened.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Darley.
Thank you, Ma'am. Just an observation, really, and I guess a request. We found it very difficult to interpret the detailed boundaries based upon the maps that are included within the appendices of the Greenbelt Review. There's just the resolution is not there to properly interrogate them in detail, and we've struggled to work out whether the site that we're promoting, the parcel is the same as, it looks to be the same as the general area. And we queried this at Regulation 19 stage. I'm not sure we got a thorough answer. So if there's going to be further work on the methodology, just a request that any further plans that are produced can be produced in a way which allow that detailed site boundary analysis to be taking place, just expecting a greater resolution of plans, really.
Thank you, Mr. Edgley.
Thank you. I think obviously the sort of many different layers of the methodology and the approach the council's taken has evolved over quite a period of time. I think the sort of approach around sort of defining areas and looking at them sort of defensible boundaries is quite a positive and reasonable kind of starting point. But as colleagues around this side of the table have sort of mentioned, there's that difficulty understanding how that kind of then relates to the specific site. So it feels like there's been a kind of a bit of a moulded approach here, where the council have sort of identified these particular areas or defensible boundaries and the likes, and then through the various rounds of consultation, sites have then kind of either appeared within these areas or not appeared, or overlapped these sort of areas. I think that then leads to kind of quite a bit of a mismatch and kind of a misunderstanding and a lack of transparency in what has actually kind of been done. If the council have identified areas and then sites have been put in, and these aren't judged in the same kind of way, how can the council reach a position where they are confident that the areas they're looking at are deliverable, they're viable, and ultimately are kind of available over the kind of the plan period. I appreciate it's a strategic plan, and forming the evidence base has to take that strategic level. But ultimately, you've got, for the plan to be found sound, you've got to be able to demonstrate that deliverability aspects. I think what I'm getting to, and I think what we've heard quite a lot today, is that it leads to quite a lot of concern that the methodology approach isn't sound and isn't based, hasn't been done in the right way to satisfy the examination. I think we've kind of heard as well through previous sessions, and as Mr Vincent's just reminded us, there will be that extra work being done. But in the basic, from the point of, is the evidence base sound, how can the examination at the stage it is now become sound by doing that work that is yet to be done by the council? I think we are clearly at such a late stage of the plan, and the work looking at them individual sites that has come in, that come in through the numerous rounds of consultation, really should have been done much earlier in the process. And I think what is become clear is the site has come in, the council have gone, actually, yeah, that it sort of overlaps, it sort of is the same area, we're looking at the same thing, quote. But yeah, ultimately that isn't the same thing. I think we're kind of looking at a very different, a big difference here between sites and the kind of broad areas that the methodology has looked at. Thank you.
Just before we go back to the council, did you have another comment, Mr Bolton? Or no? No? Okay, right, thank you. Thank you. That's right. So, council, can I check with you then? We've obviously talked about some additional work in terms of smaller sites in there. If you can look at an assessment of the sites on the basis of the boundaries that have been submitted, that would be helpful. And consider the resolution of any plans produced as well, I think, in terms of the comment that Mr Darley made then.
Yes, I think that's fine. I think I would remind that I have confirmed that the parcels that have been promoted to us have all been considered, and there are clearly some notable exceptions, as we've had pointed out to us, but for the large part they do match the boundaries. But of course we can confirm that through the further work that we've done, and I think actually Mr Darley's point, which is a good one about the resolution, will probably help with that. So for example, the site that Mr Rose raised, where his parcel of land appears to cross a main road, it doesn't on my map, and that's potentially an issue to do with the resolution. I have just checked that site, it definitely doesn't cross a main road. So I think that will iron out some of those concerns. I think what I would just remind everybody around the room of is that the Greenbelt review is designed for two things really. It's firstly to understand the role that Sheffield's Greenbelt plays, and the way it performs against purposes of Greenbelts as set out in the framework, which it does. And the second part is to provide an evidence base on smaller pieces of land if we were in a position where we were looking to release land from the Greenbelt, to understand on a much smaller, nuanced scale what role they play and what the impact potentially would be if there was if development was to take place. We've carried that out robustly. We've made amendments as necessary at various stages where sites have been promoted to us, where sites have changed shape as a result of both being promoted, potentially sometimes by more than one party or on more than one occasion. So we've endeavoured to provide an iterative process that's picked those things up, and that was part of the role of the addendum, was to try and pick some of that up as well, to make sure that as far as possible we provided a clear output. Do take the point obviously about mapping, and having been using the report myself this week to do that, I've realised that's a fair point.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any further comments on the Greenbelt review methodology or assessment? Mr Bolton.
It has just occurred to me on this, in that Sheffield very much took the view that this was a plan, there wasn't going to be any review of the Greenbelt, if you come to the decision that there might need to be, I honestly think you probably need to do another call for sites, because there will be people who would not have wished to put sites forward on the basis of a stance where there's no Greenbelt review, but there might very well be if you actually open up the opportunity for a Greenbelt review. I certainly know of some clients of mine who weren't engaged in the process because they took the view if Sheffield weren't going to review the Greenbelt boundary, they weren't going to engage with Sheffield in terms of identifying sites. It is an approach that's been taken elsewhere. And I'm mentioning it now because the worst thing would be to get the council to do all this work and then find that there's other sites that haven't been considered.
Only a really short one, because I know time is moving on. I think it's just worth reiterating that there's been at least two, if not three, I think two call for sites during the time that this Greenbelt review has been prepared. It is a Greenbelt review provided for the evidence base of formulating a local plan, but as I noted earlier, its preparation commenced, and the vast majority of its work was carried out before this spatial strategy was confirmed as being the way ahead. We've also received sites being promoted during 3 stages of consultation, 2 stages of issues and options, and 1 at Regulation 19, and we receive them informally all the time. So I think it's jumping ahead of ourselves to assume that we require a further call for sites specifically as part of this additional work that we're carrying out. So.
Okay, thank you. So we're just debating when to have a break and whether to keep going now or have a break. But I think it's probably worth having a lunch break now before we move on to the Greenbelt additions and deletions. Has anybody's got any further points we want to raise before that?
No, Mum, that makes sense, and actually I wasn't planning on staying around for this stuff, so that works perfectly, thank you. But the reason just for putting the card up, I don't know how far you've got with site visits yet, and I mean you've obviously done some, and no doubt you'll do some more before the next stage is commenced. But if I could just ask you to, when you're next out and about, as it were, to just walk a particular route, that would be, I'd be hugely grateful. And on our master plan in the Region Bus site, there's a street called Finchwell Road, and at the end of that street there's a public footpath, and it runs right across the centre of the site. It's shown on the master plan in the back of our statement, and that will take you to there's an existing footbridge over the railway, and you'll come up on the other side in the advanced manufacturing park. And I think you'd find it useful if you took that route, and if I could just ask, when you're doing that, to reflect on some of the things we've talking about meeting development needs and the session this morning and so forth. I'd appreciate that. All of it's on public footpaths or public highways, so it can be done unaccompanied. If you did want to go onto wider Norfolk estate land, of course, I'd happily make an arrangement, but I probably don't think that's necessary. It's up to you, but you're probably fine unaccompanied, I'd have thought. But thank you.
Mr. Darley, did you want to? Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. It was just a housekeeping query, really. Like Mr. Key, I haven't got anything to contribute on points 4 and 5 on the agenda, so it's very helpful that we're breaking for lunch now. But there is agenda item 6. Any other comments on matter 6? Which again, I don't have anything further to say, but I'll just wondering whether at the end of the overall session you were intending to do any form of summing up, and if you were, just to request whether there's any possibility that summing up on the first issues we've discussed thus far could take place either now or immediately after lunch, because I'd be keen to be around for that part of any discussion.
See, at the outset, I summed up where we were. I think, obviously, in terms of the additional work, which I think we've just discussed, obviously, in terms of those sites that have been omitted, there's obviously the further work that needs to be done before we can sort of make any further decisions. There's a culmination of the further sustainability assessment work plus our capacity work that we need to do in terms of looking at the stage 2s, where we'll be looking at the employment and the housing sites to look at those sort of individual sites. So we've got further bits of work, evidence that needs to be drawn up before we can reach any sort of conclusion on both housing and employment, which are obviously the two particular areas where obviously Greenbelt and the decisions that have been made in terms of exceptional circumstances have basically been sort of considered. So we're not intending to do any other further summing up, I don't think, at this stage, apart from what we've already said. So, Mr. Darley.
Mr. Rose, did you have any?
Yeah, it was just a quick point, similar to Mr. Keyes. Thanks for pausing, because I don't have any further comments on today's session, so I'll leave in a second. But similar to Mr. Key, our site is slightly different. If you were to visit the site, obviously there's no public access. It's it's a spoil heap. So as much as people do encroach on it, and there is antisocial behaviour, etc., we can obviously, with my client, obviously arrange a safe route around the site, and obviously we'd open that up to the council as well, if you were to want to visit it. Thank you. And get into the right core of the site. That would be quite great with this contamination.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Bolton.
Just a very quick request for those of us who are going to come back this afternoon. Is there an easy location to find the maps or plans of the various sites we're going to be looking at? They're not in the council statement, so will it be an easy way, because you'll need it too, I assume. It's pointless talking about a Greenbelt boundary on Hen Holmes, for example, if none of us can see it. So an easy source for that would be helpful. Doesn't need to be done now.
Yeah, I'll just explain what we're going to do. So the notation of the proposed changes is on the policies map itself, and we can show you the easiest way to find that. But actually what we're going to do this afternoon is bring up some aerial photographs that have got the various boundaries on them, so you can see what you're looking at. So I'll bring those up on the big screen.
That'd be helpful, thank you very much. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. So we'll have a break now for lunch, and then obviously if people want to come back for this afternoon's session, you're very welcome, but equally, if not, then feel free to go. And thank you for your contributions today and earlier in the week as well, for those that were here. So how long do people... 3/4 of an hour sufficient, or an hour? 45 minutes. So if we come back at 1:30 then? 1:30 then for those who are coming for this afternoon session. Thank you. afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to this hearing session. Do we have anybody different here? I think do you want to introduce yourself before we go on?
I was sat here earlier, but at the other end, so I've swapped places with Simon just for this presentation, I suppose.
Okay, thank you. So this session, the first session this afternoon, is about Greenbelt additions and deletions, which is a separate exercise, isn't it, from looking at sort of the need and scale of development. And can I just ask the council to start with just sort of explaining kind of the process that you've gone to, how you've identified these additions and deletions, and how they've been assessed? Thanks.
Yes, that's fine. Off the top of my head. So, yes, they've come from a number of sources, to be fair. So, you'll be aware, I think we've spoken already over the last few days, that the Greenbelt boundary largely is present, as it has been since the adoption of the Greenbelt boundary plan, the Greenbelt plan in 1983. There were a couple of amendments made to it when the UDP was adopted in 1998. But broadly speaking, it's remained the same since then. And I suppose one of the key features of these proposed additions and deletions is to ensure that it retains a strong defensible boundary on the ground. So they've come from a number of sources, as I said. Some relate to development that's taken place, for example, on major developed sites, where there's urban form there and has been in some cases for quite a long time. In some cases, the boundary, as it was drawn at the time, obviously that was based on literal legwork and paper maps. So as mapping has, apart from our conversation this morning, as far as mapping has improved, sometimes there are anomalies where it's hard to tell the distinct features on the ground. And sometimes, as with such a lengthy boundary, there are small places where there may have been an error made, and this is an opportunity to rectify this and ensure that there's a strong boundary that can endure. So I think just for context, I don't want to go back into history too far, but a lot of these proposed amendments have been in the public domain for quite a long time. We presented pieces of work related to the plan as far back as, I think, 2013, which listed these as proposed potential amendments. And I think the core strategy Greenbelt policy refers to the fact that there might be minor amendments needed to ensure a strong boundary for untenable anomalies such as these, so that they've not come out of thin air.
And so they have been subject to consultation then through the local plan process, have they?
Yes, that's right. They're shown on the policies map. Most recently, the version of the policies map, you can see those denoted differently as additions and deletions. John's got an example on the screen. You might have to zoom in a little bit, actually. If you zoom in, you can see a striped yellow area. That's a proposed addition to the Greenbelt. But in a number of places you can see additions and deletions that adjoin each other, where there's, like that for example, where there's an element of tidying up required to ensure that the Greenbelt boundary on the map correctly shows the defensible boundary on the ground. As we noted this morning, we've also provided a series of PDFs with the aerial photos on them we can use as we go through the agenda for those specific pieces that you wanted to probe in a bit more detail.
Okay, thank you. So one thing I wasn't sure about, in Appendix 9 of the Greenbelt Review, and in the review itself as well, you mentioned countryside areas. Are these the same or different? How do they relate, please?
Without wishing to complicate matters too much, countryside areas are a different matter. So when we adopted the core strategy in 2009, yeah, that's right, we alluded to some areas of land, effectively, which may potentially perform greenbelt purposes, but weren't originally in the greenbelt. There is a long and complex history to why some of those pieces of land weren't in the greenbelt previously, and they're still not in the greenbelt. When we carried out the greenbelt review, we felt it was important to assess the role that those pieces of land played in relation to greenbelt purposes, such that if there was exceptional circumstances to make big strategic changes to the greenbelt, those are locations that could be considered potentially for inclusion in the future. So they're reasonably big. They don't represent minor proposed additions or deletions to ensure strong boundaries. They're bigger tracts of land. Subsequently, some of them have gained planning permission on parts of their areas for housing development, for example. But no, they were a different concept, and they were conceptualised at a time when we weren't intending to alter the greenbelt boundary, but we wished to identify areas of countryside that may perform a similar function. So that was largely a core strategy approach from quite some time ago. Does that help? I'm not sure I've helped.
Yeah, so they're completely different from, they don't overlap in any way from these areas that we're talking about this afternoon. Is that
That's right?
Okay.
I don't think they do. No, they shouldn't.
Right, okay. Just so that we're clear on that.
No, there aren't very many of them either. But so they're bigger areas of the land. They're not areas that would be considered untenable anomalies where you need to make a change to make sure the boundary on the ground makes sense.
So did they form part of they wouldn't have formed part of the Greenbelt Review because they weren't in the Greenbelt then, presumably?
No, but they are included in the Greenbelt Review because, as I just said, we wanted to assess them against Greenbelt purposes, such that if we came to a point in time where we were making significant strategic changes to the Greenbelt, they could be considered as potential additions. I mean, obviously they could have also been considered as development sites, but we needed to have that understanding of the role that they play. So they have also been scored against Greenbelt purposes, and that's incorporated into the Greenbelt Review.
So they didn't score sufficiently highly then to be included in the, you didn't consider them worthy of being included in the Greenbelt. I'm just trying to understand.
I think the point is that we haven't, other than the site at Norton Aerodrome, we haven't set out exceptional circumstances for large strategic changes to the Greenbelt in either direction in terms of addition or deletion. So it's not about the strength of their performance. They would perform quite differently. They're all unique tracts of land. Some will perform more weakly or more strongly against Greenbelt purposes.
Okay, thank you. So coming back to the additions and deletions that you are proposing to make, and these are smaller scale, have you assessed those through the Greenbelt methodology? Have you scored them against the Greenbelt purposes?
Thank you. There isn't a formal scoring presented in the Greenbelt Review, no. They've been listed with their demonstrable exceptional circumstances for the change that's been proposed, with reference to, particularly where it's additions, which purposes they do perform. I think, as you'll see when we go through them, it might become apparent that they perform well against Greenbelt purposes, largely because of their context.
But you didn't actually go through the process of scoring them through the methodology.
Not through the parcels process, no.
So the evidence for making those changes, so the evidence is that as part of your hearing statement, I think you included a list of these additions and deletions with a sort of very brief summary of.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. Is there any other evidence that you have about their relative, well, I suppose to back up a case for changing the green belt boundary.
Yeah, I think as we've set out in section 7 of the Green Belt Review methodology, that the reason justification for carrying out the boundary review that looked at and raised these pieces of land, there's no other formal scoring other than the two tables that you just referred to.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else you want to ask, David, or we can just go?
Could we just look at that section 7 in the Green Belt Review, just so we're absolutely sure what evidence and what the approach is taken. If we just come back to that, just refer us to which parts of the Green Belt Review, so we could just point out that the paragraphs, etc.
Yes, it's quite a long section. So it starts by setting out the context, probably better than I just did, actually. I should probably have read from here, which initiated from that core strategy policy where we stated that exceptionally changes may be made to the Greenbelt boundary. And we noted that there were some areas of land that had been identified where they either could be deleted or should be added on the basis of their role within the Greenbelt. The rest of the first part of that section largely relates to quite big areas of land rather than the ones that we're looking at today. Yeah. So when you come to paragraph 7.27, that relates to the minor changes which are to correct untenable anomalies. And that sets out where they came from and why they need to be rectified, and sets out the principles for those changes. So part A relates to a larger change, but parts B and C, we've identified that land that's added to the Greenbelt should contribute to at least one of the purposes as set out in the framework. Obviously the paragraph reference has subsequently changed there. And for land that's to be removed from the Greenbelt, it shouldn't be necessary for that land to be kept permanently open, and indeed it may already be in use for inappropriate Greenbelt uses. So that refers to what I was speaking about earlier, for example, sites that have been developed for new homes in the time since the Greenbelt boundary was drawn up. So the appendices, particularly Appendix 8, then set out the justification in terms of Greenbelt purposes for making those changes, and that's subsequently been repeated, I think, in the tables that we've provided to you separately.
Just going to Appendix 8 then. So that Appendix 8 then refers to the, is that basically related to the appendix you provided in your statement? Is that right? Is that just so we're clear? Because obviously, do those numbering? Obviously, what we're trying to do is I suppose in the actual evidence you've given us, all it does is for each entry, particularly additions, just land meets purpose of the Greenbelt. It doesn't specifically say what purpose, that there isn't any further information. So is there any further information we can sort of define in terms of which purpose it actually relates to?
Yes, so just going to that table, so Appendix 8 that I've drawn your attention to, that's been disaggregated as we've produced later work. So this was presented back in 2020. So subsequently, the Greenbelt Review addendum presented this as two separate tables, which are the ones that we've presented to you through our written statements, separating out the deletions and the additions. So those reference numbers have changed. The performance against the purposes of Greenbelt Review, though, is noted in those tables, I think.
I think from our point of view,
Is it
the
not?
numbers are changed. and they don't relate to
Okay.
the additions. I wonder whether there's a...
Would it be helpful to pull those together in a single
I
format?
think so. It would be just useful for us to
Yeah.
get a clear understanding of how it relates to the maps that we've been looking at,
Okay,
the additions,
that's
and then
fine.
how they relate to the appendix.
Yes,
And
I don't think that would
obviously-
result in any additional information, just
No,
presenting it more
That's
clearly.
right. And the only other additional bit is just the purpose for each. What if that, in terms of the one line that you put in your statement in terms of additions, it says lands meet the purpose. It's just obviously if we have greater clarity on what purposes it meets, it just obviously that would give us greater sort of certainty about what it relates
Yes,
to.
that's not a problem. We can
No,
pull
if-
those two pieces of
please.
information into one place. That
Yeah.
will make it a lot easier.
Yeah, and just, as I say, specifically pull out which purpose it relates to.
Yes, that's fine.
Is that okay? Thank
Yes.
you. Yeah. So if we could just action that, yeah.
Just I've been a reminder to refer to section 4 of the addendum that does demonstrate sort of the evolution of that work. But I take your point that we'll pull those tables together from the information we've already presented in the public domain.
That's absolutely fine. Just so we're clear of the interrelationship between the two and what the underlying reasons are for the additions and deletions. That would be helpful for us, just to give us a bit more evidence. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I have also just been reminded that because the addendum was obviously produced some time after the original Greenbelt review, it does have slightly more changes in it. So those ones, they are unique, and we will have to add the information in for those. But yeah, hope that makes sense.
That's fine. If you just cover it in a note at the beginning, just to make to sort of clearly understand to the reader basically what's happening and why those sites are added, that would be useful. Thank you.
So if we move on then to the specific sites that we've identified in the agenda, starting with the sites north of Stocksbridge and A1, which is one of the larger additions, isn't it? Just over 5 hectares. If you can just give a little bit of background to this, that will be helpful, just so we can sort of understand the...
If John just brings up the aerial photograph, I'll just talk for a moment. John will take over the talking in a minute about the other sites. So, as you can see, I'm hoping that you can see. So, the yellow diagonal lines denotes effectively the Greenbelt as we propose it. But what you can see from that is that the majority of it is already Greenbelt, and the area with the blue diagonals on it is a proposed addition. It's largely heavily wooded. It's a local wildlife site, and the current boundary cuts across an area of similar characteristics, which are open in character. The additional area of Greenbelt that we're proposing meets 4 of the 5 purposes and creates a more robust and permanent boundary along Fox Valley Way and the Porter/Old Don River.
Okay, thank you. So
Sorry, I'm not sure if I said this or not. So the yellow diagonals are denoted as the proposed Greenbelt boundary as shown on the policies map. The current Greenbelt boundary is effectively those yellow lines without that blue area. I hope that makes sense.
yeah, so that's kind of like
Yes.
the existing Greenbelt boundary, really.
Yes. It is. It's just you can see it underneath the blue diagonal lines, so that was just for clarification.
Okay, so in terms of the boundaries on site here, the existing, the proposed boundaries. The western boundary of the new southern chunk.
That bit.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was on site, I looked at it. I didn't seem to follow the edge of the houses, and I wasn't quite sure what.
I think there is an answer to that, which might involve a very slight mapping change. So those are relatively new houses, and this amendment will have been proposed some time ago before they've actually been built. So I expect it's to do with the detail of that development.
And I'm not, I guess maybe you, whether you know the answer to this, I don't know, but do you know why this area hadn't previously been included in the green belt?
I'm afraid we don't, and anybody who might have known is no longer with us. No, I'm unsure. I don't know. I would be guessing whether maybe it was unwooded at that time, or potentially whether the steelworks had a piece of land ownership there that they wanted to keep in case they needed it. But that's a guess, only a guess.
And the area in the middle, the steelworks, that's an employment site.
That's right.
That's right.
No, it is a site, yes. Is it an employment site? Sorry, yes, it's an employment area, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So the next one is I'm sorry, in terms of the justification for this change, is that partly a mapping error then that's being fixed?
Well, it's largely to ensure that the greenbelt boundary actually relates to something on the ground, because at the moment it just cuts through the trees and cuts through the middle of that extensive area of wildlife site, so that you wouldn't be able to see it on the ground.
Yeah, just to emphasise, really, this is about strengthening the greenbelt boundary, because as Laura says, it strikes across a piece of pasture land with trees growing on it. You can't really tell the difference between one side or the other. There's no physical boundary that it's following. So it's really about strengthening the boundary so that we can follow, is it Fox Lane along there, and then the urban edge. So really it is about that, and obviously we've set out in evidence that it does meet greenbelt purposes, most notably, obviously, I think preventing sort of protection of the safeguarding of the countryside and preventing sprawl. So yeah, that's the reason why we've decided to want to include it in the greenbelt.
Because the existing boundary just...
Well, yeah, it
doesn't relate to anything on the ground. So there would be... So it would follow Fox Valley Way, the edge of the houses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
And Stocksbridge Bypass. And the issue here on the western side, that was the reason it doesn't look like it follows the...
Yeah, I think Laura,
that's the mapping issue.
Yeah. I mean, we're open to suggestions if we feel we should slightly amend that to reflect where the houses have subsequently been built.
It just wasn't entirely clear when you go on site and you kind of think, oh, I can see where the edge of the house sort of it's difficult because it's wooded and it's quite steep as well. But it didn't look like it followed the line on the map. Doesn't look like it follows the edge of the boundary. So perhaps it's just one to look at again.
Yes, we're happy to take that away and have a look at that. As I say, I think this might crop up in a couple of them where development has occurred since we actually initiated these potential changes.
Should we add that as an action? Just have have a look at that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the mapping is really again within your jurisdiction, but obviously I think obviously if we're picking up any mapping issues, even at this close scale, I think it's probably, you know, sort of in terms of looking at those changed, I think it's probably worth to take them up as an action point.
Yeah,
but there will be additional modifications that you will need to sort of, you know, to take forward yourself. But I think if we're picking up errors ourselves, I think it's probably best to rectify them now, I think.
Yeah, that's fine. I think, some may relate to mapping, but some will relate to physical change on the ground. So we'll take a look at those and make a schedule of which ones we think need some small-scale amendment, if you're minded to allow them to go in the plan.
I think this one wasn't. I think the issue with this one, it's not a mapping issue, it's the subsequent development point, so it would be responding to that.
Yes, and along the southern boundary, there's a footpath at the edge of the houses, but the proposed line of the green belt goes a little bit further to the north of that, and sort of to the north of a little brook. And I did wonder if it perhaps might be more of a defensible boundary if you use the footpath along the edge of the houses, but maybe that might be the same issue, that it's quite recent development. So perhaps you could look at that if you're looking at the western boundary as well.
Yes, I think that's fine. I think it reflects the period of time over which we've developed these potential changes, and obviously things carry on happening. We'll have a look at that.
So the next one was A6 land northeast of Stocksbridge Steelworks site, which was difficult to see on site, I have to say.
So yeah, I think similar to the other site, really. This is a familiar picture this northern edge of Stocksbridge, where we have this very old greenbelt boundary around the steelworks. Sorry, very old, well, 1983, so fairly old. So obviously the greenbelt boundary currently is along here, the northern edge of the blue area, and it obviously dissects through woodland, which is a local wildlife site. It's indistinguishable on the ground, you can't see it. So it's a case of creating a more defensible boundary. So I hope I'm speaking into the speakers. So it creates a more defensible boundary, permanent boundary, if we follow the edge of the development. And in this case, it's an allocated site, I think SDO3 or SDO1, SDO3. So SDO3 is here. Sorry, I've got a bit off there. So it will correlate with that boundary of that development.
As I say, I think without getting access to the site, it was difficult to see it on the ground. But I appreciate that the existing boundary just goes through the middle of the woodlands. But is that new boundary? It looks like it follows the edge of the site, although I'm not entirely sure if it does. On the eastern side, it's a bit difficult to tell.
It's intended to follow the area that has been previously in use in the steelworks, where there's, concrete tarmac on the ground.
And along the sort of southeastern section there, does that align with an employment allocation there? What happens there?
It's not an employment allocation. It's within an employment policy area. As far as I'm aware, there's a fence line on the ground looking at the OS base mapping. It's at the back of one of the buildings within the existing steelworks. Also very hard to tell, but there's shown to be a a fence line there.
And is that area part of the employment zone, the policy zone as well?
The area to the, let's say to the right is the employment zone, yes. Yeah, just go, yeah, there, that circle bit there.
Okay, yes, it looks like there's a... That's okay, that's okay. It looks like it follows an access road.
There's some sort of track within the existing steelworks operations, yeah. But I think there's a fence on the side of it.
So again, I guess in terms of why it wasn't previously included, is that lost in the mists of time?
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever know. So the boundary was mapped in the early 80s, and that actually continued some other greenbelt boundary mapping from previous boundaries, and the person who did it has long since retired and gone.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to A10, which is in a similar area. You just want to comment on this one?
Yeah, as you say, it's a similar issue here where we've got an old boundary, dated from 1983, and it's a wooded area that we would like to include in the green belt, and currently it follows the track a bit there, but we feel it would be a much more defensible boundary, a stronger boundary, if we were to move it and closely align it with I think it's electricity transmission station. So it's a much more robust, permanent boundary.
And these two, these last two, A10 and A6, they're both showing up on your map there. In terms of the greenbelt purposes, which ones did they meet, please, in your opinion?
Yeah, we feel they meet purposes 1, 3, and obviously, 1, 3, and 5.
Can I also say this is also part of the local wildlife site as well, so it brings it all within the green belt rather than going through it.
And the final one in this little cluster was A25. This one was just a bit difficult to see exactly on site what was happening because it's topography. But on the map that you've provided, it looks like it's cutting through the boundary, would cut through the garden, so that's why I queried it really.
Yeah, the current greenbelt boundary is across here, so it cuts across the residential gardens, quite substantial gardens for these properties. Obviously, it doesn't follow any identifiable features, so it's not a robust, it's not a robust boundary. So we had to have to make a decision as to where the most robust boundary is in this case. And we felt that we would follow the back of the houses rather than include a larger area which contributes to greenbelt purposes in terms of openness, and preventing sprawl and preserving the countryside.
On the map that you provided us with, this may well just be a mapping issue. Yeah. It looks like the boundary, the new boundary, the proposed boundary, cuts through the gardens of, I guess it would be 19 and 21 on Shelf Park.
These two.
It looks like it cuts through a building, but I don't know if that's just
I think it's
a mapping
not
error.
intended to cut through a building. It's hard to see with the aerial photo because obviously they're sometimes at a slight angle. I think that's probably a garden shed, to be fair, the one that's inside the green belt. It was drawn along the back of the the property lines as best it could be, with the intention being that it reflects the back of the property lines there rather than cutting across the middle of, I don't know if it's a paddock or I think it's a paddock behind it.
Okay, so looking at the sites northeast of Chapeltown, the A3 northeast of Cart Road. Again, I think if you could just explain, if you know, why this area wasn't included before in the Greenbelt and what purposes it would serve.
I'll let John explain what purposes it would serve and why we think it needs to change there. Again, we're not going to know the answer to any of the questions about why they weren't included or were included in the first place, because it was before any of us were planners.
In terms of why we are including it within the Greenbelt, we feel we can establish a more defensible boundary around the back of the industrial buildings, and then also along this road along here. We believe it meets the purposes of preventing urban sprawl, safeguarding the countryside. Clearly it's a wooded site, again part of a larger local wildlife site. The boundary cuts through here, again doesn't follow any features. You couldn't find it, you wouldn't be able to see it clearly. So this is a much more defensible boundary here. And obviously this is something, there's a number of sites we'll go on to talk about, but it's very similar around this industrial estate.
Yes, there's some that are very close to each other, aren't there? A5, which is the next one on the list, and A12 and A18. I think they were very close to each other, aren't they, in the same area?
Yes, they are.
And
would it help if I was saying, John, if
D10
you got the
we'll do a little whistle stop tour of the. This is where I go too far. And the map. Here we go. Yeah. Here they are. Yeah, so you can see them here. This is the site we were just talking about here. And then you've got this addition here, which is another one that you've asked us to clarify, and this site here, which is another one which you've asked us to explain how it meets exceptional circumstances. And we've also got this deletion here as well. As you can see, I mean, obviously the intention is here to align with the current boundary of the industrial estate more closely, well, clearly, more accurately. There's also this site here as well, this area of land that's also been removed, which we may go on to talk about. So yeah, it's a case of we've got these greenbelt boundaries that cut through local wildlife sites, woodland sites, and they obviously don't reflect what's on the ground physically. So it's a case of establishing a more defensible boundary here. They meet both. I hope you don't mind me dealing with them all together in one go.
Absolutely, it makes sense.
So they meet the purposes of preventing urban sprawl, safeguarding the countryside, clearly. So it's a case of sort of rectifying, reflecting what's on the ground physically, and those boundaries, those strong boundaries around the edge of the industrial estate.
So site A18, which is the one on the eastern side there. It's just on the other side of the road from Thorncliffe Road, from the other sites that we were looking at.
A18, sorry, forgive me, I can't find that on my... Oh yeah, sorry, there we go. Yeah, this site here.
So this one... again, I can appreciate that the existing boundary just sort of cuts through the woodland.
Yeah.
Actually, maybe it makes more sense now that you've got the map up showing all of the remaining areas of greenbelt, because when I looked at the site, I thought, oh, the new boundary doesn't relate to anything either, but that's perhaps because I didn't have the rest of the greenbelt there. So that other section along Thorncliffe Road, that's all within the greenbelt then, is it? To the west of that area, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the area on the, I suppose the southeastern side where it adjoins the houses. I wasn't sure where the boundary on the ground was there.
Okay. It seems to curve around here. Again, it might be that we could look at that, but in terms of what do we follow there, you could follow the tree line. Am I in the wrong place? Oh, apparently it follows the tree line.
Sorry, without the overlay, you can see the tree line better. I know you can't take the overlay off.
So is the tree line then a more defensible boundary than the edge of the houses? Was that the view that was taken?
I think that's the reason why it's been drawn that way, yes, is that it, obviously if you come right up to the houses, it would also include an area which is just a garden for those two sets of houses. Typically small gardens we'd exclude from the greenbelt if they've got an edge to them. I think, as with the other one, if you prefer us to take a look at whether the line could be redrawn slightly better, then I'm not going to hold that tight to it, but conceptually it's got to be a better line than going through the middle of the trees.
Yeah, it's not particularly distinct on site, I don't think, but I accept that wherever it's difficult to get a clear line across there, because somewhere you've got to draw the edge, haven't you? And it's not particularly easy, but it's a minor point. So I think the only other one on this in this section was A11, which is on the edge of industrial.
Excuse me, before we go on, could I don't know whether it's appropriate, but just whilst we were dealing with that area, I just wondered whether I could introduce a site which I think has been overlooked, that is very close to where those sites were being discussed. It is in my representations, but I just wanted to draw your attention to the representations that we submitted on that, which is it's 143 top Warren. That's right, just in there, just a bit further up. Yeah, and that accommodates at the moment. It's a brownfield site. It has a group of terrace properties. It has a new build in there as well, a single dwelling and some despoiled land. And we would say it's about 0.62 of a hectare. And when the new build detached dwelling was granted, which was back in 2016, the planning officer's report confirmed that the development can be considered to be within the confines of the existing group of buildings. It would not lead to encroachment of an urban development into open countryside, and the development would be shielded from outside the site and would not be highly visible from Greenbelt to the east. So I think we can conclude that it doesn't meet the purposes of Greenbelt, and it does have a highly defensible boundary. It is brownfield, so we just think that it's been overlooked as part of this process, particularly since in this area there has been other additions and deletions. So I think it should be reconsidered.
Okay, I guess we treat this as a mission site, really. But if you want to respond on that point.
Sorry, yes, I do recall the submission there. I think happy to consider it through the emission sites, but I think in principle where we're checking the strength of the Greenbelt boundary, clearly to take a small island out for I think 2, 3, 4 houses, it wouldn't necessarily make sense. There's quite a lot of houses scattered throughout the Greenbelt. Indeed, there are entire villages and hamlets washed over by Greenbelt. It doesn't preclude them from being there. It wouldn't result in a stronger boundary than there currently is along that main road.
I just come back and said you can't have it both ways in terms of if you're looking at sites that are are untenable and have an anomaly, then this is precisely the location. It's close to, or it lies adjacent to the existing urban area, and as I say, if they're going through this process, then this just cries out for it to be reassessed.
Okay, thank you. I've heard the council's response to that, so we just move on then to site A11. Can you just explain this one, please?
So yeah, this is not far from the other sites. it's also a local wildlife site, part of a larger local wildlife site. There is a fishing pond here and grassland that is associated with that pond. It's a sort of recreational area. This is the current greenbelt boundary across here. There's no physical features that it follows. I mean, you could argue it maybe follows a bit of the pond at the top there, but really it doesn't follow any identifiable features. So it's not robust and defensible. So the intention is to extend the greenbelt and draw a more defensible boundary across here, as I'm showing on the map. Obviously, it meets in terms of purposes, it prevents urban sprawl, and again safeguards the countryside from encroachment. Because that is obviously a fishing pond is a fairly sort of rural countryside feature.
Yes, I think this one did. I identified these and then subsequently looked at them on site, and some of them did make more sense when you went out. So, but just to get your
apologies, we probably should have provided these aerial maps as part of our evidence, and they will be obviously in the examination library.
If you have one, that would be helpful. Thank you. So the next ones in northeast Sheffield. David's going to look at those ones.
Okay, thank you. If you look at A17 first. Yeah, just same reasons why the change. Obviously, I think I can see on the ground, and then obviously what purposes.
Yeah, so the current greenbelt boundary runs along here and then in a straight line across this sort of paddock area. There's no defensible. It doesn't follow any defensible features. In terms of purposes, the land, if included, it prevents, if allocated for designated greenbelt, it would prevent urban sprawl and safeguard the countryside. We've drawn a tight boundary along the back of the residential properties. That is a robust new boundary. I think it's hopefully fairly straightforward, that one.
That's fine. Yeah, if you move on to the next one, that's quite straightforward. Looking at the aerial mapping, thank you.
Okay. Next one is A35, which is at High Grieve. So there are actually a number of. This is the right one. Yeah, there are a number of sites along in this area on Cross Hill Road, I think it is. And this is obviously the first one on 185 to 191 High Grieve. So the current boundary goes along here and then into here. It doesn't follow any identifiable features or boundary features. I should just say that this area, if I could sort of zoom out a bit and head towards it, just to explain, it's one of those green belt fingers that comes into the city, so it's quite important in terms of preventing sort of this area here. So it's a very thin strip of green belt that provides sort of green infrastructure, accessible countryside to local residents, and it obviously prevents these two areas from merging together. Going back to the site, so that's why a tight boundary is drawn along in this area, and the intention is to follow the line of the residential properties along here. As to why it was never included in why it wasn't included in 1983, I can't. Again, I do not know. We do not know.
Okay, thanks. Just the purposes again. I presume you're A and C. Is that right? In terms of just the.
In terms of purposes, yeah, it's preventing sprawl and safeguarding the countryside.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
D.
D22, yeah. So, yeah, this is D22 here. Yeah, I think I understand why this has been identified. This is a deletion, unlike the previous ones. So the green belt boundary runs along here, then down here. There was a building on here previously, and that's how it was in terms of that. It was granted permission for housing, and it looks like it's been mapped incorrectly. And the green belt boundary, we're happy to amend it to reflect the back of the actual residential property rather than go through their house, which doesn't seem particularly identifiable.
Didn't make sense to me.
No.
I was
I think it's a
trying
relatively
to look on the
recent
graph.
extension.
Yeah.
And the next ones as well, the D just further north,
This
really.
one.
They seem to go through the middle of the houses. I wasn't quite sure when I looked at them. Effectively, they were literally through. There was two bungalows and a two-storey property at the north, and they effectively seem to go through the actual properties themselves.
I think, as John said, it's quite a complicated area. You perhaps will have seen when you visited it. It's got quite a messy back line. And so we've attempted to redress that through mapping in the past, and probably in the time since they were drawn up initially, probably 10 years ago, there's been some extensions and there may well have been bits that were missed. So I think we just need to, as John said, check those and make sure we reflect it properly where there've been those changes.
We would still look to keep a quite tight boundary in that area rather than look to bring the boundary to here, given the importance of that thin strip of green belt. So it would still be fairly tight to the back of those properties.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I mean, obviously the one on D22, the one to the south, the one at the base is 165A Cross Hill. That's obviously slightly easier. I think the other one, when I looked on the ground, D23 seemed to cut across three properties effectively. So particularly 125 and 119 Cross Hill, it effectively went through the middle of those properties. So yeah, you'll obviously try to draw the boundaries as tight to the built properties in those locations. Is that what you're intending to look at?
Yes.
Thanks, yeah. If you could look at those and just confirm the purposes as well for me there for those two.
Are there purposes for a deletion? So I've just been asked.
Sorry, yeah, I'm getting a bit confused. Yeah, sorry, yeah, no, you're right. No, we're going the wrong way. Okay, so yeah, if we just move on to D27, yeah.
Okay, D27. Fine. Where were we? I'm now getting lost. There we go.
D27.
There we go.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a deletion here too. We've obviously got a land here which is very much associated with the residential property here, and I think the intention is to create a more robust boundary along here. But I think we might be looking at is it another mapping issue here where we seem to be going through some buildings at the back, some outbuildings. So it may be that we could look to again draw a more reflect the physical nature of the boundary there and come along the back there a bit better.
Yeah, it's been drawn as a straight line, hasn't it? I think it possibly goes through a shed.
Yeah. Again, it reflects the sort of the confused sort of picture of what's going on in this area where you've got, I mean that in the nicest possible way.
I think there's been quite a lot of encroachment over the years.
Yeah.
Also.
Yes, if you just have another a re-look at, particularly obviously with the relationship between obviously 3 obviously is where the main, number 3 Cross Hill, but obviously number 5, the boundary between those two, I think as you say, whether it needs to be moved slightly to the east, only marginally if it needs to be. Yeah. It wouldn't need too much of an adjustment, but it's obviously just again, it's just making sense on the ground really. But yeah, if you could just look at that, that'd be great. Thank you.
That's fine. Yep.
So I just add that, and then the final one I've got. It's just D35, I think, which came in as a modification.
Yeah, go for it. Sorry.
Thanks. Yes, this came in as a proposed modification, and we've suggested it as an amendment at the point we submitted the plan because it was incorrectly not shown on the Regulation 19 policies map. I think you can hopefully now see from the aerial photo that the proposed deletion will result in a more robust and permanent boundary that's clearly identifiable by a quite big stone wall around, I think it's a former service reservoir. At the moment, the Greenbelt boundary crosses the site and there are no visible boundary features on the ground.
That's fine, yeah. I had a look at that on site and it seemed to make sense. So from the evidence that was submitted, so that's absolutely fine. I think obviously you need to just add that into your list of the modifications. So just to confirm, yeah, is it just so we've got so just add that into the list. Yeah, it was a LS02 in your, I think, main modifications list. I think looking at my notes. So just going to hand over to Rosie Morgan then, just to do the next two.
So D15 land at Rycroft Glen Road. I just wasn't sure why you needed to make this change actually, because as far as I could work out, the existing boundary goes around the back of the houses. So
yeah, we've reviewed this proposed Greenbelt boundary change, and I think, and we are in agreement with, I think your view is that I don't think it should be removed from the Greenbelt. It's a wooded site. It would follow if the current boundary is robust. It follows the back of these residential properties in the road, and there isn't a feature to follow. So yes, I can't answer where it came from a bit before my time.
No, I think the original proposed change was there'd been a change to the boundary of the local wildlife site, and the officer who was covering the area felt that effectively presented the opportunity to change the boundary to be more satisfactory in that location. But I think when we've looked at it, it doesn't really need changing to ensure a defensible boundary. So I think we're happy to not put that change forward.
So take this one out then of the list. So would that be a modification to take it out? How would we treat that then? Or is it a minor change?
I think it'd have to be a modification, wouldn't it? Because it potentially affects...
Sorry, the additional modification. So it's for you again to change, but obviously I think we need it to be effectively just noted as an action really, and then obviously that should flow through to your additional modifications because it's a mapping issue again. actually going back to we took the Wheel Road, actually that'd be a similar issue. Actually, just thinking about D35, again, it would be a mapping issue, so it would be an additional modification as opposed to a main modification. Just to be clear, the one we spoke about previously, just to be absolutely, it's the same sort of issue really. I know it is a deletion, but yeah, just.
Okay, so then moving on to D19. Again, I wasn't entirely sure why you needed to remove the car park, because it seemed like quite an open feature. So, did you feel that this land wasn't serving any greenbelt purposes?
I think. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, John wasn't the initiator of this change. I think the boundary, as we proposed to amend it, was felt to be a stronger boundary that left the open area in the open land. I don't know that we necessarily feel particularly strongly about it if you think that the current greenbelt boundary performs better. I think we just felt that the car park wasn't really performing a greenbelt function.
Okay, I didn't have a strong view on it, to be honest, but it was just a query, really, I think. I can see that you also propose it on the sort of eastern side to take the boundary along the edge of the houses, so that's certainly a more defensible boundary. But
I think these homes have been built since the greenbelt boundary was first drawn up, so it's just reflecting what's actually there on the ground.
I'll take the A2 for the land north of Alston Lane, Alston Drive.
Yeah, so this land here is identified as open space in the UDP, and extending the greenbelt. The current greenbelt boundary runs diagonally across these fields. It's not. There's no. It doesn't follow any physical features. It's quite it is a larger area. The intention is to bring the greenbelt south to follow the back of the residential properties, and we feel that is a much more defensible boundary. In terms of purposes, it prevents urban sprawl and is obviously safeguarding an area of countryside. So yeah, that's. I think that's it. I think Simon will also help with this site.
Yeah, we appreciate this is perhaps a larger amendment, but perhaps I can just give a bit of history and background to this area of the city. So the southeast of the city was one of the areas which saw a lot of new housing development during the sort of 70s and 80s and 90s as well, really. When the Greenbelt boundary was originally drawn up, the sort of edge of the new housing there had not been clearly defined, and so it was a sort of an indicative boundary as to where they thought the housing was going to go. What's ended up happening is that the new housing that's just to the sort of southwest of this amendment was really was designed to run up to the ridge line. So if you're standing out on site, if you're standing to the north of that, the land drops away and you can't actually see that housing from the land. If you're standing in the fields to the north, I think you can just about see the rooftop of one house. So the idea was that you retain that sort of open character of that land between the new development there and Owlthorpe to the north. In character, the land is exactly the same, really, as the Greenbelt land to the north, and we feel that it's a continuous area of exactly the same character. It's countryside, it's predominantly an agricultural use, so it is contributing to purposes 1 and 3. But we appreciate it's a larger change, but it reflects the way that the area has been developed over time, really, since the original boundary was conceived, sort of in the early 80s.
Okay, thank you. That's clear. Obviously, it makes it much clearer with the representation of the existing green belt and that background. Thanks very much. Yeah.
And so the last one is A14, west of Overcroft Rise. I mean, I'm guessing this is perhaps another slightly tricky area at the backs of houses, but when I looked at the aerial imagery on Google Street View, it looks like there's a new building that's been put up there. Just there. That's right. Yeah, and so I wasn't entirely sure about whether that had been taken into account and whether that was intended to include that.
The new building post-dates drawing up this amendment. I think sort of fundamental thing to just note is that the backs of these properties, there's intended to be a line there. There's been a series of sort of long-running disputes over where people's gardens should stop and the greenbelt should start, and the intention is to draw a firm line there as to where the boundary is along the backs of those properties. But as you say, there's subsequently one that's been built behind the boundary.
So, given that change, it's not a residential building, is it? Didn't look like it. It looked quite.
It is.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. There was originally a barn here, and then a residential property. It was on appeal, wasn't it? Was granted on appeal here, and it's got a sort of a fairly long history. This area, this site. I think when I looked at this boundary, I did consider whether it was correct in this area here. Sorry, because it seems to jut in and it seems to follow perhaps what was there previously before that property got planning permission. So I think the council would rather keep this building within the greenbelt, but draw a tighter line along that boundary there, which are residential properties. Why it didn't follow that, I can't answer that, but I think it should probably follow the back of those properties.
Yes, it does look like it. It
sort of dog legs in a bit.
clear, yeah. So that's another one just to.
Yeah.
But again, that's just an additional change for.
In terms of purposes, it's safeguarding the countryside and preventing urban sprawl.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, just in terms of that, so just so we're clear, obviously on that action, just obviously the mapping reviews are, I think, from what I've noticed, A1 and A14 plus D22, D23, D27, and then obviously delete D15, and then obviously add D35, which is the Wheel Lane one, as additional modifications, or whatever, make changes.
Thank you.
I'll obviously go through the list at the end, the action points, just so when we're on that point.
So there's no other comments on those detailed additions and deletions. Just move on then to policy GS2. And so the council were proposing one modification to this policy, LS29, to replace one word in part D of the policy, replace the word proposed with made, which was in response to consultation, I think. Could you just explain why this change was proposed?
Yes, thank you. It's for clarity and to make sure that the policy can be used effectively. I think, again, it's helpful to look at the tracked change version in part 2, which is CD 35. But effectively, the changed word there, apart from anything, it avoids duplicating the word proposed twice in the same sentence. But actually, I'll read the full sentence with the beginning part of the policy so that you can hopefully understand that it makes sense. In the Greenbelt, development that is not inappropriate will be permitted where it meets the tests set out in national planning policy and where, part D, proposals for infilling of a small gap are made in the following locations, and then it lists the locations. I think what we wanted to make clear was that it's we permit development that isn't appropriate in those locations where a proposal has been made, rather than necessarily making a change in those locations. So it's to enable us to respond in development management terms to proposals for infilling developments in those listed locations. But it avoids saying proposals twice in the same part of the sentence. It's as simple as that. It's for clarity of understanding it.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. That would be a main modification to the policy, yeah, just to confirm that. Does anybody have any other comments they want to make on policy GS2? Mr. Bolton.
Just a general comment and a comment on Greenbelt policy. First, I am still struggling with the wide range of alterations that are being proposed to the Greenbelt, especially in terms of additions where we've got over 20 hectares being added to the Greenbelt, and 13 of those are over half a hectare in size. And I understand that the council are saying, well, we're just tampering with the edges. But some of the sites that are being put forward, certainly come within the 5 hectare size, which is being said, well, that's really not a Greenbelt review. So I do have an issue with that. Secondly, in terms of exceptions for Greenbelt, with Sheffield at the moment, there is a significant unmet need for older persons housing, and elsewhere in the country, albeit not in Greenbelt authorities, we have persuaded inspectors to insert a exceptions policy to allow older persons housing outside of settlement boundaries where there is a proven need. I think in this case there is a proven need. There are no allocations being made. I think that's exceptional circumstances for that type of development, and I would suggest that you consider an exceptions policy. It's a point actually we've made in our matter, which is a housing mix one, matter 4, matter 5. We have made the point elsewhere to have an exceptions policy, is all I'm saying. So I'm not just making it up on the hoof, although obviously I am likely to do that occasionally, and I apologise for it, but this time I haven't. There is a suggestion there for an exceptions policy. and whether that be a separate one or one that is incorporated in this Greenbelt policy would be up to you, but I would commend it to you.
Okay, thank you. And I guess we will be coming back to this. As you say, there's another session on housing needs, isn't there, in stage 2? I think it's matter 3, still part of matter 3. I think. So we'll come back to that one. Is there any other points on this policy? No? Okay, thank you. So we'll just go through the actions that we've agreed over the last week now then.
Sorry, Mum. Would it be possible just to have a short break now, because we'd just like to get printed off sort of our consolidated lists. I think we've got them printed for the. Have we got them printed for the rest? Oh, we've got them. Well, maybe we don't need a break then. Obviously, this doesn't include the ones we've just been through. Yeah, but if you wanted those as well, we could have a short break, but I don't think there were many, were there?
Can I just clarify about, I think you'd asked last night about whether we could also provide a list of main mods for the blue and green infrastructure as well. We've got that as well if you want to.
It's fine. We're looking at it together. So because Rosie Morgan obviously dealt with it, so we're just going to go through that first. If we could through that sort of schedule first, and then we'll come on to the actions and main modifications from this week. I'll deal with that. So. If we could just cover that first, the main modifications to the BG1, I think, etc.
Changed during the day, is it? Or is it? No. That's the user changes to BG1. Thank you. So just in terms of wrapping up the actions from this week, well, before we do that, in the session last week, we didn't go through the changes that we'd agreed to, or proposed modifications and actions from the last session on Matter 4, which was about blue-green infrastructure. So and the Council's now provided a list of their proposed modifications following that session.
Yeah, I've just given you too many copies. Can we take one back so that we can have a version?
I haven't had a chance to look at this in detail, your track changes version, and I will do, but there was just one thing that immediately I thought was perhaps missing, was On policy SP1L, there was your proposed modification LS20, which was removing reference to the green network. There were some changes made to that policy and to policy BG1 for consistency. I don't think that's picked up in this list, so that just needs to be added. And also, just as an addition to that, to remove reference to the green network from the definitions from that policy, just so that it all follows through. Other than that, I think that's all looks okay. But I will check it again in detail. I'll track you and the track changes, and if there's any divergence, I'll come back to you through the programme officer. But
yeah, I mean,
just that initial issue that I did note.
Yeah, I think hopefully it's clear which are additional and which are main. I think that's tried to set that out as clearly as possible in the track change versions.
Thank you for that.
Okay, we just quickly go through the actions for this week and any main modifications. On matter 5 relating to employment, starts with action 32. Obviously, it starts with the updated information about the market analysis, etc. That's absolutely fine. So 33 relating to the A1 corridor logistics, that's fine. 34. Again, updating table 6.1 from logistics study is okay. The next one is relating to the modification to SP1(3). At this stage, we haven't agreed on the figures in terms of you've obviously put the forward as an amendment, but I think what I tried to those will be subject to further consideration. So the main modification at this stage can't explicitly put the figures in, just to be clear. So I'd suggest this action or modification is basically to update employment figures once fully considered, and to make large scale strategic warehousing the requirement more explicit. That's really what I was trying to get out of that main modification, rather than putting the modification with you've suggested with the figures in. I don't, at that stage, I'm not suggesting that should be quoted as a main modification. We're not agreeing to the figures at this stage, because that's something I need to further consider. But what I want to do is separate basically the general from the large-scale strategic warehousing, which I think was basically agreed.
I think so. My note was there had previously been some suggested wording, and it was just to strike out the words "in the wider property market area," because that was the bit that was confusing. Is that right?
That obviously was helpful, taking that out. But I think just in terms of the way this is presented, it's just more about presentation, really. The reference you've said is right. I think we don't want reference to the core property market area, but just the way this action point is presented at the moment, if it could just say that effectively amendments to SP Part B to explicitly set out the large scale strategic warehousing. I think leave it at this stage. I think we'll come back once we've obviously further considered the evidence and the representation as to the full format of that. I think the full sort of wording of that particular sort of part of Part B. So if that's okay, just in terms of the action or main modification, I don't think it's something it'll have to be, I think, sort of dealt with at a later stage. I think once we've looked through everything else. Going on from there, Action 35 is absolutely fine in relation to looking at the areas, reasonable alternatives in the employment, basically to be covered by the addendum to the integrated impact assessment. 36, produce reduction in reduce tables in relation to looking at the splitting out what the different areas were. That's absolutely fine. Going on to matter 7 now, infrastructure and transport. Again, these all seem okay. RH19, EH19, RH1. The only one I think that's just I've got to pick up is it just really the very end of. I think all of the main modifications that you've picked up there are fine in terms of the actual list. The only additional thing I had was it's probably an additional action that probably is not picked up. It's reflective of what's in GC21. It's this discussion I had about the list of documents that are listed in policy T1. So there's obviously a list of non-development plan documents, and it's just not featuring in the action points there, so it should be added probably as an additional action point, either at the end. So it's obviously in my agenda item for matter 7, to just be clear, obviously, and when I discussed it, there are a number of documents. I don't want to go through them all again, but there's the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority Transport Strategy, South Yorkshire Enhanced Bus Partnership. There's a number of documents that are throughout the document, throughout policy T1, and they need to be moved from the policy to the actual point text. It's just not picked up there in the action point. So it probably was the last thing we were talking about, but that just needs to be picked up as an additional action point on matter 7. But otherwise, the rest of those reflect what we discussed and agreed at the end of the discussions yesterday. So just moving on to today, and again, appreciate these obviously need to be typed up, but from the action points I've noted is add the Barnsley Greenbelt study, etc., methodology to the examination library, the Greenbelt assessment to consider further sites submitted, including emission new sites submitted as part of the Reg 19 consultation. Just for clarity, I think Ms Stevens, I think you referred to in your consultation statement, I think it's CD 23. I think there's a list of sites there. Is that effectively is that part of the what you're intending to look at? So where there's a whole list of new sites that were submitted. Is that what you're intending to look at?
Well, the point I was making in relation to those was that those were sites that were promoted to us through the Regulation 19 consultation, so we listed them specifically in there as emission sites. I also pointed out that all but one of the ones in the Greenbelt had previously been included in Greenbelt work. So I think when we draw up the schedule of works looking at those emission sites, they will be included in there, yes, and we'll also reference the other points at which they've been promoted.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, thank you very much. Just my third action it's basically produce a note and obviously just merge the Greenbelt additions deletion appendix. It's Appendix 8, I think you referred to in your Greenbelt review, and obviously Appendix 3 and 4 of the Greenbelt review, where it talks about the deletions and the emissions, and it's just pulling together a note and the actual sort of making sure there's cross-reference effectively between the two, so we've got all the evidence together. And then obviously, it was just making an additional commentary on the which purposes of the Greenbelt the additions met. I think in the appendix as it's presented, Appendix 3 is just a one-line. It just says, meets purposes. And I think we've discussed quite a few of them today. I think it's a similar, just so we're absolutely clear what purposes it meets. just what we've just been discussing in terms of the mapping. So review mapping on A1, D22, D23, D27 and A14. Delete D15, I think that was the... and then obviously it's obviously making sure D35 is added, the one at Wheel Lane is added as a sort of an amendment, an additional amendment. Mr. King, as a further action, is add overlays to examination library. I think you presented them to. I think that'd be useful. I think that, you know, if those could be added to the examination library. And then the only one I've got is just the proposed modification to policy GS2, is LS29, needs to be added to the main modification schedule. I don't know if there's anything else you've picked up in relation to discussions today in terms of matter 6.
No, that covers it all.
Okay, yeah. So if those are produced and sent to us via the programme officer, next week, then obviously we can. They will obviously eventually be published on the examination website. So without further ado, obviously just thank you for the last 2 weeks for your contributions, both from the council and other representatives. You've been very helpful in terms of assisting us over that time period. The next stage of hearings are due to start on the 24th of September, so a little while away, but the stage 2 hearings will commence then in accordance with the programme that's published on the examination website. So thank you and thanks very much.